I'm going to talk to you today about business models. Now, this is a very popular topic in the management journals. All the big consulting companies talk about business models and say how important they are. And of course, they feature very extensively in business school courses, in entrepreneurship, in strategy, and in other classes. But there's a bit of an issue with the way in which business models are explained and used. And that is that they're not so much business models as business statues. They are a frozen picture of some of the basic features of a business. So I'll start by explaining some of the difficulties that arise from this, and then go on and illustrate those difficulties with a couple of the cases that we use in strategy dynamics. So the first of the problems that arises is that there's a lot of ambiguity in the language that's used to describe the elements of a business model. So words like resources and channels and partners and customer relationships are used somewhat indiscriminately. And the difficulty with that is that different people may use the same word to mean different things and may use different words to mean the same thing, which at best is going to lead to some confusion and at worst could make the model actually rather limited in its use at all. The real fundamental problem is that business models following the approaches that are described in these other sources don't say anything at all about scale. We don't know how many potential customers we're talking about, we don't know how many products the business is launching, we don't know what prices are or costs are. We don't know anything, as I say, about the scale of what's happening. And the real big issue is we've got no idea whether this business model that we're describing in qualitative descriptive terms actually works. We can list all the things we like and persuade ourselves that it will work, but we've got no way of actually proving that this is a viable business model that is capable of surviving and performing and delivering results. And that means that we can't test anything. We can't test sensitivities to outside assumptions, like we could be making a misestimate of the size of the potential market. What if competitors behave in different ways? We can't test those things. And we can't test the strategic choices that we might make. We can't test, for example, what would happen if we chose to offer more products or fewer products, a higher price or a lower price, hire more people. And the bottom line, and the real killer here, is that it doesn't tell us anything about the business performance. We don't know anything about what sales will result, what revenues will be, how costs will develop, how cash flow will develop, or what investment or other expenditures we have to make to get this thing to actually go. So, as I say, those are some of the difficulties, and I'll illustrate those difficulties with some examples of how business models are presented. So let's start with a couple from the consulting world, and this is a framework that the Boston Consulting Group use to describe what they mean by a business model. So at the top you've got a requirement that you should describe the value proposition. So what target customer segments are you aiming for? What product and service offerings are you trying to make? And what's the revenue model? So kind of how much sales and revenue are you hoping to get out of this? It doesn't actually tell you how to quantify any of that, but at least it's listed as something you should try to do. At the bottom you've got the operating model, which starts with the value chain. How is cost and value added as you go through the process of developing and producing products and getting them to customers and supporting them, the costs of all that, and the organisation required to actually make it possible to operate and deliver this business. And when you put that value proposition and operating model together, that's what they call a business model. Now here's some guidance from PwC and what they describe as their kind of back to basics about business models. This is their advice on what you should do. Number one, you should describe how the company is structured and how it delivers its products and services. You should discuss the business model in the context of the overall strategy. And PwC actually say that you should actually be using these terms interchangeably. Strategy and business model, they seem to be implying are the same thing. They then recommend that you explain how this business model will actually make money. the model for making and selling products. Well, making products is manufacturing or production, and selling products is selling. So I'm not entirely sure how information about making things and selling them actually tells you how the business is going to make money. Their fourth recommendation is that you should explore value creation activities. They emphasize that it should be in free-form style. So they're not even suggesting that you should try to put any structure or quantification or scale on any of this. And lastly, their step 5 is that you should look at the value chain of the business and show how the company adds value and presumably makes money. So there's lots of describing and discussing and explaining and exploring and looking at, but there's no actual substance to this. There's no scale, there's no definition on these things. So to see the kinds of difficulties this causes, let's look at a very popular framework for this, which is the business model canvas. And here is a generic picture of that canvas. I'm not going to spend time actually explaining that in the abstract. Let's go straight into a couple of the examples that we use in the strategy dynamics field for illustrating how dynamic business models work and just see what a static business model could actually do for us. So here is a small size IT support business. It's serving small to medium enterprises, SMEs in its local region. So that's the definition of the customer segments that it's serving. Its key activities are winning new clients, taking on the IT systems and software that those clients have when they first take on the client, providing routine support to customers, providing hardware and software upgrades to those customers, and hiring the necessary support staff. The key resources that this business has, well, its clients are a critical resource because they're generating the revenue, and you're only going to actually serve the customers if you've got support staff, so that's a second key resource. And you need those support staff to have experience, so the support staff experience is a third key resource. You could arguably add another one, which is the range of products and services that the business delivers, but those are the main resources. The value proposition here is really rather simple. They're talking to local hotel companies and building companies and law firms and so on. Those people don't know anything about IT, don't want to know anything about IT. They just want reliable support, and because it can be quite costly, they want the service support to be as low cost as is reasonable, consistent with reliable support. Customer relationships, well, being relatively small companies you're selling to, and this is a significant issue for those companies, you'll be selling direct to the CEO. You're not talking to some vice president of information services or anything of that kind. It'll be the CEO who has to think about these things and worry about them. But once the relationship is going on, then you will have direct relationships with the staff in the company, and they could be staff at almost any level. People will be encouraged, if they've got an IT problem, to actually call you. So that's your relationship with the customers. The channels by which you deal with the customers, well, you will have to be on site for doing some physical upgrades. You can probably do some software upgrades remotely over the internet, and of course you'll be using phone and online support for sorting out problems that the client staff come across. Key partners, well, there aren't any key partners in this case. It's just you and the clients. There's nobody else involved in the relationship. The cost structure is almost entirely driven by the staff, the support staff, the technical staff that you employ. There'll be some overhead on top of that. The costs of the software and the costs of the hardware will simply be passed through to the customer with a markup. So when you come to the revenue streams, the revenue is almost entirely driven by charges for each hour of support staff time that your customers take from you. Plus you'll be getting revenue from that on sale of hardware and software. So as I say, this is a very simple, a deliberately simple choice of a business to illustrate the principles of a business model, and you can see it describes things quite well, but it doesn't say anything about the actual circumstances of this business. The actual situation that this company faces is it's in big trouble. It's losing clients, it's got bad service quality, it's losing staff, and the danger here is it's actually going to go out of business. But there's nothing in this picture that tells you anything about that. It's exactly the same business model as existed 24 months earlier, when the business was actually doing very well and being very successful and making plenty of money. So how does this help you figure out why this business is in trouble, or indeed how to turn it around and fix the problem? Let's go to a slightly more complex example. This is from the marine engineering industry, and this concerns a company making equipment to clean the ballast water that ships pump into their holds when they're not carrying cargo. There's a separate video that explains in a bit more detail how this business actually works. But it's a quite small business in a very fragmented industry, and they have got much more complex choices to make about customer segments. The world shipping industry is characterised by a very wide range of ship operators, ranging from companies just operating a handful of ships right up to really big companies operating hundreds of vessels around the world. Amongst those vessels, we've got very small ones like coastal fishing fleets, right up to monster vessels that carry the container shipping around the world, or the bulk carriers that move iron ore and that kind of product from between the continents. So you've got to make a choice about which size of vessel you're going to sell equipment for. Now that's all about selling the equipment to companies who need to retrofit this water cleaning equipment into existing vessels. There's another segment of the market, which is the people who are designing and building these vessels for the first time. So you have a choice as to whether you're going to go for those customers as well. And even within a particular size group of customers and a size category of vessels, there are different types of vessels which might have different needs. So is it a fishing vessel, or is it a ferry, or is it an offshore oil service vessel? They all have different needs. So this is quite a complicated choice for this company to make. The key activities here, again, this is going to be a bit more complicated than the IT support case. They have to develop specific models of equipment for actually cleaning this water, and when they've done that, they've then got to get it approved by the US Coast Guard and the International Maritime Organization. When they've got approved models, they have to attract agents who are going to work on their behalf to sell this equipment, or at least pre-sell to potential ship operator companies as their potential customers. You've got to build market awareness. This is a small business in a global industry. How do you make people aware that you even exist? When the agents have got the pre-sale done for you, you've got your own sales force who actually go and really close the deal with customers and win the customer. And then you've got to keep going back to the customer to capture each order for equipment for every vessel that they have, because any particular shipping company, particularly the larger ones, may have 2 or 3 different approved suppliers. They have to organise and manage the manufacture of the units that get installed in the ships. The company outsources the manufacture itself, but you've got to have people to supervise that. And you also have to supervise the installation by third-party installers who will put the equipment actually in the ships, and then you've got to go and commission the equipment and make sure it's working properly. And the last activity is that you have to arrange for the availability and delivery of spares and maintenance for the equipment. So quite a rich set of activities in this business. Key resources here, well, the models of equipment that you've got are one set of resources. The agents that you have, the sales force you employ, the different customers split out by segments, the installers you have relationships with, and lastly, the equipment that is already installed in ships. That's an important resource because that generates maintenance and spares revenue out into the future. The value proposition here will be pretty common amongst most of the providers, but there's 1 or 2 unique things about this company. This equipment needs to be compact and easy to fit in the ship. The hold of a ship is a cramped and awkward space, so the design of the equipment to be as easy to get in and to install as possible is really, really important. Once it's installed, it also needs to be simple to operate. It needs to be, if possible, no manual intervention at all. The equipment ought to operate itself if possible. And one thing that's unique about this particular technology is that it does not involve any consumables. You don't have to kind of feed it with any chemicals or anything of that kind. The customer relationships here, or sales, go through agents and also through direct sales from your sales force, and you'll be making those sales to the people making decisions about the vessels in the shipping company, in the ship operating company. You'll have customer relationships through the third-party installers, which will be key to maintain, and you'll have customer relationships for the spares through companies that distribute spare parts and other equipment for ship operators and the shipyards that do the fitting of vessels. The channels by which you reach these customers, well, the equipment supply agents will be one of your key channels here. The shipyards themselves are key channels, and the installers are channels to the customer as well. If you do a good job and the installer likes installing your equipment, then they're likely to encourage other ship operators to choose your kit as well. Key partners here. This business does not do its own R&D. It subcontracts the R&D to a research institute. The equipment manufacturer is a key partner. We need to set up a good manufacturing relationship with the equipment manufacturer. And we need to maintain good relationships with the equipment installers, who are other partners that we deal with. The cost structure here, well, the R&D is actually capitalised. We spend money with the research institute and capitalise that research cost. There is a manufacturing cost of the goods themselves, and price minus cost of goods gives you the gross profit on each unit that you sell. Staff costs are driven by the number of salespeople and the number of design and installation engineers that you have. There is an installation cost, but that again is outsourced, and there's a cost associated with distributing the spare parts. Revenue, well, that's relatively simple. You get revenue when or soon after you actually deliver the equipment, and you get revenue when or soon after you deliver the spare parts. So once again, this is a rich picture, and it's quite a good description of the main elements of the business, but it doesn't tell you anything at all about the scale of this business. It doesn't tell you whether it will work or not. It doesn't tell you how many customers, how many staff, and it certainly doesn't tell you anything at all about how the performance of this business will change and develop over time. For all we know, this business could be loss-making from day one and go bust in 12 months' time, for all we know from this otherwise quite plausible business model. So as I say, here are the problems and limitations with these descriptive, qualitative business models. They are ambiguous in their terminology. In the strategy dynamics method, channels, partners and customer relationships are all categories of resources, and you can see in the description of the marine engineering business that the installers actually featured, I think, in 3 or 4 different locations on the diagram. Well, they're listed, but kind of so what? As I say, there's nothing about scale here. Are we talking about 10 potential customers or 10,000 potential customers? Are we talking about 5 different models of equipment or 50? Is it going to cost $50 to buy this equipment or $5 million to buy this equipment? Well, actually, we do know the answer to all these questions, but they don't feature in this business model at all. And we certainly do not know if this business model would actually work at all. We've no idea if this is a viable business model or not, and we've no idea whether it would be viable when it's trying to compete with other businesses that are trying to do the same thing. One notable feature about this approach to business models is that apparently competitors don't exist. There's nothing in the business model that says anything about competitors at all. We can't do anything here about testing the uncertainties, and there are huge uncertainties in this marine engineering situation. We don't know, for example, when exactly the regulations are going to come in to require this equipment to be fitted into vessels. So until that day comes, it's going to be quite a struggle to sell the equipment to ship operators. You can sell some, but nothing like as much as when the International Maritime Authority says you have got to fit this equipment to your vessels. There's nothing here for testing uncertainty about what competitors do. There's nothing for testing the choices that we make. We can't figure out from this whether we should offer one model of equipment or 3 models of equipment or 10 models of equipment, whether it should be small units for small vessels or medium units for medium vessels or large units. There's no means of making any testing of our choices here. And as I say, there's nothing at all that tells us anything about performance. We don't know what sales are going to do, we don't know what costs are going to do, we've no idea what the cash flow is going to look like or what investment is required to make this thing fly. Now, there is a category of business models that does go just a small way to answering some of these problems, but even that's limited, as I'll show you, and those are financial business models. If you search the web for financial business models, you'll find quite a few examples of these. And as the name implies, most of these focus on the structure of the income statement, what's going to happen to revenue, to product margins, operating cost fractions, profitability, return on sales, return on capital, those kinds of numbers. But those tend to be kind of somewhat picked out of the air. It is typically recommended that the revenue forecast is built up from a forecast of the market's development and some view of what you think your market share is going to be. Well, we've got no way at all of actually figuring that out for this marine engineering business at all. This business is going to grow as fast as we are able to sell to the customers and all the other equipment suppliers in the industry as well. The industry will grow as fast as those suppliers collectively make it grow. There's no higher authority somewhere saying this market will grow at 20% a year. It's going to be driven by the suppliers and by the regulations of the International Maritime Organization. Some of these financial business models actually are dynamic. They do look at how revenue, costs and profits change over time, but none of them make any attempt to link the financials quantitatively back to the concrete resources of the business themselves. How many customers, how many staff, what capacity, how many products. And they don't attempt to connect the dynamics of those factors, how they change over time, to the changes in the financial performance. So that really is why we need working, quantified models of the whole enterprise. What a business model should be is that it should be one of these working quantified models, and it should do the same thing as the real business does, and it should do it for the same reasons. So you should be able to look at the quantified business model, you should be able to look at the real business and actually see a mirror between those two things. That's what it should be doing for you. And in the case of new ventures, then it should be showing you a plausible picture of a viable future for the business. And if when you run the numbers through the model, it turns out it's not viable, then you've got to go back to the drawing board and redesign the working business model that you've put together. It'll probably still have exactly the same things on it as you had in your business model canvas, but you'll have to do some things to figure out what the numbers are going to do differently in order for the business to be viable.